Hey everyone, welcome to Mr. Rainy Night. Before we dive in, drop a comment and let me know where in the world you're tuning in from. And if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and subscribe. All right, get comfy, relax, and let's begin. It sat at the far edge of town, past the dead cornfields and the broken fence line where the pavement gave way to gravel. Everyone knew the house was there, that hulking, colorless shape hiding behind the trees like it didn't want to be seen. It wasn't marked on any map, and no one could remember who built it or when. It had simply always been there. We'd all heard stories, of course. Whispers passed between kids in crowded hallways and under bleachers after dark. Some said it used to be an orphanage. Others claimed a family once lived there and simply vanished one winter. A few swore they'd seen lights flickering in the upper windows, even though the power lines were long dead. I never believed any of it. Not really. But the house always made me uneasy. Not afraid exactly, just unsettled. Like it watched you from behind its rotted curtains. Like it knew who you were. We used to dare each other to walk up and touch the front door. Most turned back before they even reached the porch. The few who made it all the way claimed they heard something on the other side. A faint knock maybe, or breathing. One summer evening, that feeling changed. The air had that late July thickness to it, heavy and warm, making your skin feel like it didn't belong to you. We were bored, restless. One of us brought it up. The house. The idea wasn't even a dare this time. It felt more like something we had to do. As if the silence of that house had been calling out for too long. And now, it was time someone answered. There were 5 of us. No flashlights, just the pale light of the setting sun and the dull glow of a phone screen. We slipped through the trees in near silence, crunching on dead leaves and twigs. When the house came into view, it felt larger than I remembered. Taller, hungrier. The door was still there, still shut. Still warped and weathered like old bone. But the strangest thing was, it was slightly open. None of us said a word. Not about the smell, not about the stillness, not even when the wind died the moment we stepped onto the porch. Something in the air shifted, like we'd stepped through something we couldn't see. That's when we heard it. A knock. 3 times. Slow, hollow, coming from somewhere deep inside. No one moved. We just stared into that thin crack of darkness beyond the doorframe, the sound still echoing inside us. We should have run then. We didn't. We didn't speak as we stepped through the threshold. The air inside was colder. Not just cooler than outside, but wrong, like walking into the stale breath of something ancient and buried. The house groaned softly around us, but the sound didn't come from the wood. It was deeper, like the house itself was breathing. We stayed close, shoulder to shoulder, our feet creaking on the warped floorboards. Dust floated in the air, thick and slow, catching what little light remained through the broken slats of boarded windows. There were no obvious signs of life inside. No furniture, no belongings, not even old wallpaper. Just bare wooden walls, a sagging staircase, and doors that seemed to lead nowhere. But still, the place didn't feel empty. It felt occupied. We moved slowly, as if rushing might wake something. There were 5 rooms on the ground floor. We peeked into each one, nothing but shadows and silence, except in the last one. That's where we heard the voice. It was faint, so faint we thought we imagined it at first. "Help!" We froze, looked at each other. The voice came again, clearer this time, but still low, as if muffled by layers of dirt and time. "Please, someone." It was coming from the floor. We crouched, ear to the ground, and listened. There it was, unmistakable now, a soft thudding, like fists pounding on wood from below. Then the voice again. "I'm down here." It didn't sound like a ghost. It didn't sound threatening. It sounded terrified, desperate, human. One of us, the boldest, reached down and began brushing dust aside. There were seams in the floorboards, faint, but there. A hidden door, a cellar. Maybe someone's trapped, someone whispered. From when? Someone else replied, more afraid now. We didn't answer. Instead, we began prying at the seams. Fingers worked into gaps. A nail broke. Blood smeared the wood. Still, no one stopped. The voice was getting softer, like it was fading, slipping away. Then, a loud knock from beneath. Not 3 knocks this time, just one, sharp, final. Then silence, heavy silence, pressing. The floorboard beneath our hands shifted, just slightly, enough to feel it move under us, like something had shifted on the other side. None of us said it out loud, but we all felt the same thing. We weren't alone under our feet. One of us leaned in close again, pressing an ear to the boards. And that's when a second voice spoke, right against the wood, not asking for help, just whispering. You found it. The floor gave way with a brittle crack. Dust billowed up like smoke as the old boards snapped loose, revealing a square, dark opening beneath us. We stared into it, waiting for our eyes to adjust, but no light touched whatever was below. It wasn't just dark, it was void. No ladder, no stairs, just a sheer drop into shadow. I saw something move, someone whispered, but none of us had. Or maybe we all had. In that weird way your brain fills in the blank when it knows something should be there. The voice had stopped. That whisper, you found it, still echoed in my skull, like it had been meant just for me. One of us pulled out a phone and switched on the flashlight. The beam hit nothing but dust particles. The light was swallowed whole after a few feet. No bottom, no walls, like the opening was a wound in the world. And yet, something down there felt aware of us. I'm going in, one of them said. Not brave, not bold, just blank, like they weren't in control anymore. We argued. Of course we did. But it didn't matter. One by one, something pulled at each of us. Not physically, but mentally, like a thread unraveling at the base of the spine. We didn't jump. We just climbed down, each of us into that silent mouth beneath the floor. The air inside shifted the moment we passed through. Heavier, wet, like breathing in rotten paper and mildew-soaked memories. The walls weren't made of wood or stone. They were soft, crumbling, earthen, and they pulsed, faintly, like lungs. We moved through a narrow tunnel that seemed to bend around itself, never straight, always curving like it was alive. The light from our phones flickered, distorted. Shadows no longer followed the rules. They moved on their own, like they were detached from us entirely. And then we heard it again, not voices now, crying, soft, far away, childlike. We followed it, because how could you not? Each step felt longer than the last. Time dissolved, or maybe bent. I couldn't remember how long we'd been walking. A minute? An hour? Eventually, the tunnel opened into a wide, low chamber. The air was thick. The floor beneath our feet was slick. And at the far end of the space stood a figure. Small, still, facing the wall. The crying had stopped. Someone called out to it. The figure turned. It had no face, just skin stretched where eyes and mouth should be. And then all the lights went out. When the lights went out, no one screamed. We just stood there in the dark, paralyzed by the image still burned into our eyes. The faceless figure, the stretched skin, the way it had turned toward us like it knew each of our names. Someone whispered, "What the hell was that?" No one answered. The silence pressed in around us. We could hear each other breathing, sharp, shallow gasps echoing off the damp walls. Then we heard something else. Movement, not ours. A soft scraping sound like fingernails dragged slowly across wet stone. It was getting closer. We fumbled with our phones. The lights wouldn't turn back on. Some of them had died. Others just refused to glow. One flickered to life, casting a sickly blue circle on the floor. And someone was gone. There had been 5 of us. Now only 4 stood in the circle of light. We called their name over and over, louder, more desperate. We turned in every direction, scanning the dark, hoping they were just out of view. Hiding, slipped behind a wall. But the tunnel hadn't branched. There was nowhere to go. They were just gone. Then the crying started again, not from where they vanished, but behind us. We turned slowly, phones shaking in our hands. There, further down the tunnel, stood another figure, smaller this time, shoulders trembling, arms limp at their sides, their face buried in their hands. It looked like the one who disappeared, but we knew it wasn't, because when we stepped closer, the figure mimicked us, every movement, every breath, perfectly, like a puppet, like it was trying to convince us of something. And when we whispered their name again, it dropped its hands. There was no face beneath, just darkness. One of us dropped their phone. Another ran. I stayed still, because I finally understood. This place wasn't just underground. It was beneath reality, a layer below the world we knew, a forgotten corner where the rules had rotted, where memory and fear and identity unraveled. And it had noticed us, all of us, not just the one who vanished, not just the one it mimicked, but me, especially me. We never found the one who vanished. We looked, God, we looked, running through every twist of that impossible tunnel, calling their name until our voices were raw. But the place didn't care. It swallowed sound like it swallowed light. And the farther we ran, the more the space around us felt wrong. The walls were changing. Once earthy and soft, they began to feel smooth, cold, almost metallic, but not man-made, organic, as if we were inside something vast, sleeping, and alive. We stopped running, because somewhere along the way, we realized we were no longer 5. We were no longer 4. We were alone. Each of us. The others. Gone. Vanished between one step and the next. No sound. No warning. Just absence. I don't remember the moment I turned back, or if I even turned at all. Maybe I was turned. Maybe I was guided. All I know is I was suddenly outside again, back in the room with the broken floor and the open hatch. It was morning. Sunlight filtered through the cracks in the boards like nothing had happened. Dust floated peacefully. The door stood shut behind me. I was alone. I left the house without a word. I didn't go to the police. What would I say? That my friends were eaten by a hole in the ground? That a place beneath a house beneath a town took them and left nothing behind? Weeks passed. Then months. The town moved on. People asked where they went. I said I didn't know. That we'd gone walking and they'd never come back. Which, technically, wasn't a lie. But the house never let me go. I still hear it sometimes, not with my ears, but somewhere deeper, when I sleep, when I sit too long in silence. Knocks, whispers, the sound of something shifting under my feet. And last week, a package arrived at my door. No return address, no note, just a box. Inside, a photograph, old, grainy. In it, 5 kids stood outside a house at the edge of town, smiling, holding flashlights. One of them, me, was looking directly at the camera. In the background, the front door stood slightly ajar. Behind it, in the shadow, was a 6th figure. Unclear, tall, watching. I don't remember anyone taking that photo. I burned it. I watched the flames eat the paper, but the image still lingers. Burned not just into my memory, but into something deeper. Sometimes when the wind is just right and the night is especially still, I hear a knock at my door. 3 times. Slow, hollow. And I don't answer, because I know it's not over. It never was. It started like most evenings, quiet, unassuming. The sun had just dipped beneath the horizon, casting long lavender streaks across the sky. The air held that early autumn crispness, sharp enough to feel, but not enough to bite. Fallen leaves rustled underfoot, dry and brittle, like old paper. The old public park, overgrown and mostly forgotten, became their haven this time of year. Claire and Thomas had walked this path every evening since he retired. They said it helped them sleep, helped them talk, helped them remember that life, no matter how fast it moved in the daylight, could still slow down if you let it. The park was once lively, back in the 80s, maybe early 90s, before the city's budget cuts and nature took over. Now, the benches were moss-covered, the old playground rusted, and ivy crawled over once paved trails. Street lamps no longer lit the way, leaving the shadows to stretch freely after sundown. But it was quiet, safe, in its own strange, sleepy way. Claire liked how the trees swallowed the noise of the town. Thomas liked how the air always smelled faintly of pine and earth, like they were walking through memory. They'd pass the same bent signpost at the fork, not at the statue of some forgotten philanthropist whose name had been worn down to a smear, and take the same loop every evening. But tonight felt different. Not in a way either of them could name, just heavier somehow. Thomas mentioned it first. "Smells like rain," he said, though the sky was clear. Claire paused. "It does, doesn't it?" She took a deeper breath. The scent was there. Wet soil, though the ground was dry beneath their shoes. The kind of smell that usually came after a storm, not before. Still, they kept walking. A breeze rustled through the canopy, colder than it should have been for early fall. Claire hugged her cardigan a little tighter. They reached the bench near the pond, their halfway point, and sat without speaking for a few moments. Then, just as Thomas leaned forward to retie his shoe, Claire saw it. A light, soft, flickering, moving. It hovered between the trees across the pond, far off the trail, in a part of the park they'd never dared to explore. Too wild, too overgrown. Claire blinked. The light bobbed slightly, almost like someone walking slowly, holding something. A lantern? She nudged Thomas. "Do you see that?" He looked up, squinting across the darkness. Nothing. The light was gone. Claire tried to laugh it off. "Must have been a reflection," she said, though the words didn't carry much weight. Her voice sounded thin, like she was trying to convince herself more than him. Thomas stood up and scanned the tree line. "Could have been someone walking with their phone flashlight," he added. "People come out here sometimes, right?" "Not back there," Claire said quietly. The spot where the light had appeared was choked with growth. Thick underbrush, twisted branches, old fences barely clinging to rusted hinges. It was the part of the park that had long stopped pretending to be a park. More like a sliver of forgotten woods wedged between suburbia and memory. They resumed their walk, a little slower now. The moon had begun to rise, casting a pale silver across the path. With each step, the shadows lengthened and the trees leaned closer, their branches whispering to one another like gossiping old ghosts. And then, there it was again. Thomas stopped mid-stride. This time, he saw it too. A soft orange glow, warm like candlelight, floating just beyond the bend, deeper into the unkempt part of the park. It moved slowly, steady, purposeful, not bouncing like a jogger's phone or flickering like car headlights through trees. It had weight, presence. Claire whispered, "You see it?" Thomas nodded, not taking his eyes off it, and just like before, it vanished. No fade, no blink, just gone, as if it had never been. For a few long seconds, neither of them spoke. The wind had died. Even the leaves seemed to hold their breath. Claire finally broke the silence. "That's not normal." Thomas exhaled through his nose. "Could be someone playing a prank." "At our age? Out here?" She shook her head. "This place barely exists to anyone under 50. They turned back the way they came, suddenly aware of how far they'd walked. The trees that once felt familiar now loomed a little larger, their silhouettes more jagged under moonlight. But just as they reached the bent signpost near the fork, Thomas paused. He turned to look back, toward the overgrown trail they'd avoided for years. The glow was there again, but closer now, brighter, and it didn't disappear this time. It hovered, waiting. Claire felt it too, that pull. Not physical, but something more subtle, like the way a campfire draws you in on a cold night, even when you know it might burn. "We should go," she said, her voice low, but neither of them moved. They should have turned back. They both knew it. But something about that glow, that soft, beckoning warmth in the dark, tugged at something deeper than reason. It wasn't loud. It didn't pulse or flicker. It simply waited. Thomas was the first to move, not with any sense of urgency, more like he was walking into another room, curious, calm. Claire hesitated, then followed. The narrow trail they stepped onto was barely a path anymore. Brambles reached for their ankles, and roots curled like sleeping serpents across the soil. A broken wooden fence ran alongside them, long since swallowed by vines and rot. The park's hum faded behind them. The streetlights, the faint sound of distant traffic, even the insects, all gone, replaced by a deep stillness that pressed against their ears like cotton. Claire glanced at Thomas. He walked slow, deliberate, eyes fixed ahead. The glow remained constant, never closer, never farther, always just ahead, always just within reach. She thought of old stories her grandmother used to tell, about will-o'-the-wisps, lights that danced over bogs and marshes, leading wanderers astray. But those were just stories. This was real, wasn't it? The air grew colder the farther they went. Not bitter, but damp, like the chill you'd feel in a basement that hadn't been opened in years. Claire wrapped her cardigan tighter, but Thomas didn't seem to notice. Then the trail ended. They emerged into a small clearing, round, encircled by crooked trees leaning inward like old men conspiring. The light floated at its center, no higher than a person's chest, and now they could see it clearly. A lantern, brass, tarnished, glowing from within. No handle, no chain, just suspended in the air, as still as if the world around it had stopped moving. Claire reached out instinctively, just a step, when Thomas grabbed her wrist. His grip wasn't rough, but it was firm, like he'd just woken up from something. His eyes met hers, and for the first time that night, she saw it. Fear, not terror, not panic, but a quiet, bone-deep fear, the kind that whispered, "This isn't ours to touch." Claire looked back at the lantern. It hadn't moved, but now it felt different, not inviting, watching. The lantern flickered for the first time. It had held steady all this time, a constant, unwavering glow. But now it trembled, as if disturbed by a breath neither of them felt. Claire took a small step back. Thomas didn't move. He was staring at the light, head tilted slightly, like he was listening to something she couldn't hear. His hand let go of her wrist. "Thomas?" she whispered. He didn't answer. She turned to face him fully, and that's when she noticed. His face had gone slack. Not blank with confusion, but distant, detached. His eyes shimmered strangely in the lantern's glow, as if reflecting something else entirely. Then he whispered, so quietly she barely caught it. "I've been here before." Claire's stomach dropped. "No, you haven't," she said too quickly. "I remember now," he continued, still not blinking. The trees were smaller, the grass was higher, but the light, it was the same. Claire reached for his arm. "You've never—" "I followed it," he interrupted, "when I was a boy, just once." He finally looked at her. "I didn't come out for 3 days." Claire's breath caught in her throat. That had never been part of any story he told. And in their 30 years of marriage, Thomas had told every story at least 3 times. "You never said." "I didn't remember," he said. "Not until now." The lantern pulsed again. This time the light expanded, just slightly, spilling farther across the clearing. As it did, shapes began to emerge. faint outlines between the trees, figures, too still to be people, too tall to be statues. They weren't there a moment ago. Claire blinked. The shapes remained, not moving, not approaching, just observing. She turned to Thomas, but he was already stepping forward. Claire's instincts screamed. She grabbed his arm, pulling him back. His voice was soft, almost pleading. "I need to see it." "No," she whispered. "Not again." He froze, not because of her grip, but because something had changed in the lantern. Its glow, once warm and amber, now deepened to a cold bluish hue. Less like a flame, more like a memory. It wasn't guiding them anymore. It was remembering them. And Claire, suddenly, sharply, realized the shapes in the trees weren't just watching. They were waiting. Thomas took another step forward. Claire didn't stop him this time. Maybe it was the look in his eyes, soft, almost grateful. Or maybe it was the quiet around them, thick like velvet, making every sound feel intrusive. She stood still, breath caught somewhere between her chest and throat. The blue light deepened, not just in color, but in feeling. It hummed, not out loud, not in any way the ears could catch, but somewhere inside her bones. Like a low chord of music that had always been playing beneath the world, and she was only now hearing it. Thomas stepped into the clearing. The lantern didn't move, but the figures in the trees did, just slightly. A lean here, a tilt of a head there, not aggressive, not welcoming, not human. Claire felt tears well, though she couldn't explain why. Thomas stopped in front of the light. He looked back, just once, and then he vanished. No flash, no scream, no swirl of wind or collapse into dust. He simply wasn't there anymore. Claire's breath finally released. A quiet, broken thing. The light remained for a few seconds longer. Then it began to fade. Slowly, softly, until only moonlight was left. She didn't scream, didn't run. There was no point. The trees around her were still trees again. The park was just a park. And yet, as she turned and walked back down the trail, she noticed something strange. It wasn't overgrown anymore. The vines were gone. The roots cleared. The fence intact, as if someone had come through just before her and cleaned the way. She followed the path back to the pond, to the bent signpost, to the crooked bench, and then to home. In the weeks that followed, people asked, "Where's Thomas?" She said he wandered off, got lost, maybe took a bus out of town. No one questioned it too hard. People vanish all the time, after all. But Claire knew. Every evening she walked the same path again, not in hope, not in grief, but because sometimes just at the edge of that forgotten trail, she'd see a soft blue glow between the trees. It never got closer. It never came out. It just stayed, waiting. And Claire would pause, touch the edges of her sleeve where his fingers once curled around hers and whisper, "I remember too." Then she would turn away and leave it be. It began like any summer evening in Ridgeview, the kind where the heat clings to your skin and the town feels like it's melting under a lazy sun. I remember it clearly because the silence that night was broken by a sound we hadn't heard in years. An ice cream truck. The melody was wrong, warped, like an old cassette tape playing underwater. It played slowly, too slowly, dragging through the air like something heavy. At first, it brought back memories, sure. Running barefoot down sidewalks, clutching sweaty bills, arguing over rocket pops or fudge bars. But this wasn't that. This felt different. The truck itself was ancient, a boxy, rust-bitten thing with chipped paint and long-faded cartoon decals on the side. The kind of vehicle that looked like it had been sitting in a junkyard for decades, not something that belonged in front of our school or rolling past the neighborhood park. And then there was the man driving it, Mr. Dalton. Nobody knew where he came from. He didn't speak unless you spoke first. He never smiled, just nodded slowly, eyes hidden behind thick glasses, posture stiff behind the wheel. His white uniform was clean, pressed even, and a laminated vendor permit hung around his neck like a badge of trust. That badge is what made people ignore their instincts. "He's licensed," they'd say. "It's harmless. Let the kids enjoy something for once." And in a way, I wanted to believe that too. God knows Ridgeview hadn't had much joy lately. He never offered anything for free. Everything had a price. Exact change only. No receipts, no interaction. The kids lined up like they always had, but it wasn't the same excitement. There was something in the air, something tense, like everyone was waiting for something to go wrong. And then there was the staring. I saw him once, just once, watching the playground after he had already closed the truck window. He wasn't watching anyone in particular, just watching, as if studying a scene he'd seen 1,000 times, or searching for something, or someone. I didn't think much of it at the time. He was just a weird old man, right? Creepy, maybe, but not dangerous. Then again, Ridgeview had always been the kind of town that mistook silence for safety. He came every Tuesday, like clockwork. Same route, same stops. And no one questioned it, not even when the music seemed to slow down a little more each time. Not even when some of the kids who visited the truck didn't come to school the next day. Looking back, I should have trusted that feeling in my gut, the one that said, something is wrong. But like everyone else in Ridgeview, I looked the other way, right when the nightmare was beginning to roll in, one slow mile at a time. At first, no one in Ridgeview suspected a thing. The truck was old, yes, and the man inside even older, with sunken cheeks and skin like parchment. But he never did anything obvious. He simply parked at the edge of the playground or by the corner of Maple and Fifth, playing that same warped lullaby. The children would come running with coins in hand. Unlike the stories parents used to tell, don't talk to strangers, don't take candy from a man in a van. This felt weirdly official. Mr. Dalton wore a vendor badge on his chest, and the truck had a faded county permit sticker on the windshield. It made him look legitimate, harmless even. But then Sam went missing. Sam was 8, the kind of kid who wore superhero capes to the grocery store and thought ice cream sandwich was the greatest invention on earth. He'd been seen last at the corner where the truck had parked. Just a kid, a chocolate cone, and a wave goodbye. That night, his parents called the police. There was no trace, no footprints, no camera caught him walking off. Just gone. People told themselves it was a coincidence, a runaway, maybe a custody dispute. But then Mia vanished too. A quiet girl, barely 7, always clutching her backpack to her chest like armor. Same story, ice cream, disappeared. Still, no one questioned Mr. Dalton. He didn't speak much, but when asked, he just shrugged and said, "Kids come and go. This town's too boring to keep them." What terrified me most wasn't what he said. It was how calm he looked saying it, as if children fading from existence was as natural as leaves falling in October. I started to pay closer attention after that. I kept a log. Every stop he made, every child that walked up to the truck, and something began to take shape, a pattern. He never visited the same neighborhood more than once a week. He never served more than 5 kids at a time, and he always drove away exactly 7 minutes after stopping. It felt too precise, too rehearsed. The authorities barely noticed. Ridgeview had a small police force, 1 overworked sheriff and 2 rookies who still called everyone ma'am and sir. They thought the parents were just looking for someone to blame. "No foul play," the report said. But I knew they were wrong. Mr. Dalton wasn't just some creepy old man with a sweet tooth. He was a predator, and the truck was his trap. It wasn't just the disappearances. It was the silence that followed them. After Sam and Mia were gone, people in Ridgeview whispered more than they talked. No vigils, no missing posters on street poles. It was like the town collectively chose to forget, to erase the discomfort before it settled too deeply. But I couldn't. I kept tracking him. Mr. Dalton, the truck, the music, the route. My notebook filled with dates, times, locations, and eventually red circles around certain names. Kids, ones that weren't in school anymore. Some had moved, people said. Others were visiting relatives. No one used the word missing. It was like they were afraid saying it would make them disappear too. One evening, I followed the truck. I stayed 2 blocks behind, headlights off, heart in my throat. It was just after 6 p.m. The sun was bleeding out behind the houses. The warped jingle of the truck floated back toward me like a siren call underwater. He stopped at a park. No one was there, except one girl, Elise. She lived down the road from me, always rode her bike alone, always had her nose in a book. I watched her pedal up to the truck. She hesitated. He leaned out of the window and said something I couldn't hear. She handed him money. He handed her a popsicle. Then, he smiled. It was the first time I'd ever seen Mr. Dalton smile. It was wrong, stretched, too long, like he had to remember how a smile worked. She turned and rode away. He stayed parked. 5 minutes, 7 minutes. Then he drove off. I followed again. This time, he didn't go back to the center of town. He turned off the main road and headed toward the outskirts, the industrial part of Ridgeview, where no one went after dark. Abandoned warehouses, fields overgrown with weeds, silence thick enough to choke on. He stopped behind an old feed mill and just sat there. I parked down the road, crouched behind a fence, and watched. He didn't move. For nearly half an hour, he just sat. No music, no lights, no motion. Then, he opened the back of the truck. There was no light inside, just a gaping black mouth. I swear I saw something move in there. Not someone. Something. I couldn't tell what it was, but it shifted, slid, like it wasn't walking, like it wasn't meant to be in that space, in that shape. And Mr. Dalton just stood there, staring into it, smiling that same stretched smile, as if he was feeding it. That night, I stopped tracking. I locked my notebook in a drawer, and I told myself, it's not my business, not anymore. But I still hear the music sometimes, even when I know the truck's not nearby. Warped, slow, distant, like something humming in the walls, waiting to be let in. After that night behind the feed mill, I tried to go back to normal. I stopped logging his stops, stopped checking the news. I even deleted the photos I'd taken, not because I thought they were dangerous, but because I didn't want to look at them anymore. Not because I stopped believing, but because I did. But you can't unsee what you saw. You can't unfeel that kind of fear, the kind that sinks into your bones and reshapes the way you breathe. Mr. Dalton still made his rounds. Same truck, same warped jingle. But now, every time I heard it echo down the street, I froze. My hands would go cold. My chest would tighten. I'd peek out the blinds like a coward and watch the same scene unfold. Children lining up, mothers waving from porches, no one questioning anything. Then, on the second Friday in October, Elise didn't come home. I waited for someone to say something. Her parents, her school, the Ridgeview News, but nothing came. No police cars, no search parties. It was as if she had never existed. That broke me. So I went to the sheriff. His name's Buckley. Big guy. Used to be a football coach before taking the badge. I showed him my notes, what was left of them. Told him everything. The patterns, the timing, the truck, the feed mill. He didn't even open the folder. Just leaned back in his chair and said, "Son, you ever think maybe you're seeing what you want to see?" I left sick to my stomach, but I understood. Ridgeview wasn't blind. It was complicit. This wasn't the first time I realized. The town had seen this pattern before, a decade ago, maybe longer. They didn't forget. They chose not to remember. And Mr. Dalton? He wasn't hiding in plain sight. He was protected. I began digging into the town archives. Old police reports, news clippings, anything I could find. Most of it was gone. But there were gaps, years where kids just dropped off the map. Every 7 to 10 years. No explanations, no arrests. Always in summer, always after someone new rolled into town. It was a cycle, a ritual. And Dalton, he was just the latest face behind the wheel. I found a photo from 1982. Same truck, different man, same look in his eyes. Blank, detached. The names changed, but the van stayed the same. The melody never stopped. The town never stopped it. I stopped sleeping. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Elise's face, or Sam's, or Mia's. Sometimes they'd be standing in a field, sometimes inside that feed mill. But always, always, there was the sound of that music. Slow, broken, trailing behind something that was no longer just a truck. The town moved on. Of course it did. Halloween decorations went up. Fake cobwebs, plastic skeletons, jack-o'-lanterns. The kind of things that used to make me feel safe in the dark, like monsters could only exist if you invited them. But now I knew better. I started seeing things. A figure in the corner of my eye, movement in reflections. Sometimes I'd wake up and swear I'd heard the jingle playing outside my window, even though it was 2 a.m., and the truck was long gone. I didn't trust myself anymore. I didn't trust anything anymore. Then one morning, a package showed up on my doorstep. No return address. Inside, a single photo, freshly printed. It was me, crouched behind the fence watching the feed mill. Taken from behind. Someone had been there, watching me. That was when I understood. This story had never been mine to tell. I was never a hero, just another name in a file, another page in a notebook, another person who got too close. And maybe Ridgeview had learned long ago that survival came from silence. So that night, I did something I swore I wouldn't do. I walked up to the truck. It was parked near the elementary school, under a flickering street lamp. Kids had just gone home. The sun was setting. Mr. Dalton was inside, hands on the wheel, motionless as always. He looked at me when I stepped closer. No surprise, no fear, just quiet understanding. "Want something?" he asked, his voice dry and almost kind. "No," I said. "I just wanted to see if you'd recognize me." He blinked, then smiled, that same smile. I always remember the ones who watch. I turned and walked away. I don't know what I expected, a threat, a whisper, a shadow trailing me home. But there was nothing. Only the jingle behind me, getting fainter. And the terrible understanding that Ridgeview would keep turning, kids would keep disappearing, and no one would ever do a damn thing about it, including me. I left town 2 weeks later, burned my notes, changed my number, moved somewhere no trucks play music anymore. But sometimes, in the quiet of night, when the wind carries just the right pitch through the trees, I still hear it. That broken melody, calling, waiting, reminding me in Ridgeview the ice cream man never leaves. He only waits for the next summer.